Welcome to the Traitors podcast, a Spotify top 10 podcast. My name's
Woo!
Yeah, woo! My name's Matthew. I'm a writer working in TV development, and I am a 100% faithful fan of the multi-award winning hit TV competition series, The Traitors. This podcast features deep dives into every episode of the show, as well as interviews with contestants. This is season 7 of the podcast, dedicated to series 2 of The Traitors UK, and this episode is our finale recap. So,
Woo!
so much celebration. So it goes without saying that there will be spoilers from the get go. Do not listen if you haven't watched the finale. That was your warning. And joining me to talk about episode 12 is obviously the same person who's joined me for every finale recap episode on the Trader so far. It's David Bloomberg. David, you've already had him
Woo!
doing.
Oh, hi. Hello. Yes, I am back. Um, so yes, as most listeners know, and of course, due to your introduction there, I have been thrilled to be on every finale with you, and of course, this season, every third episode. So you could say each week's finale I have
Yeah.
been on. And of course, also, as most listeners know, I've been covering reality TV for over 23 years, online, in newspapers, on my own websites, on podcasts, on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram, on Twitter, you name it. I'm there talking to somebody. I'm still trying to get Substack figured out. I may at some point. That was going to be my goal during the winter, and then 2 seasons of The Traitors came out.
Yeah.
But I did want to say, I never find a way to slip this in, but you always introduce yourself by saying you're a 100% faithful fan. And I just want to say I am a 100% traitorous fan. So,
Uh, and that makes sense because when we play our game a little bit later on, you will probably beat me again.
well, I don't know. You won last time.
I did. That was a freak one off. Now, David, not only are you joining me for the finale, but this is an extra special episode in various ways because by complete coincidence or destiny, and I know, David, as I've said before, you are a big numerologist and a fan of
Yes. Yeah.
clairvoyancy and destiny and fortune telling. This is the 100th episode of the podcast. It's worked out
Woo! Oh,
perfectly. It's the final of the Traitors UK Series 2 and our 100th episode all at the same time. I think we had quite different experiences of watching the finale too. My experience for the first time, I watched The Traitors with literally hundreds of other people. So I'm at a big music festival in the UK called Mighty Hoopla, and they decided to sort of transmit the live broadcast in a bar and a big screen. I thought there would be a bunch of people there. It was packed, absolutely packed with people. I was wearing my Traitor's cloak. You can see this on the Instagram page for the podcast, and I went thinking, "Oh, this is a bit silly that I'm wearing this cloak. People will be looking at me." I was not peop There were people, entire groups dressed as Claudia Winkleman. There were fringy wigs everywhere. Other people had come in groups with cloaks and lanterns. I'm not kidding. So me and my little cloak I was totally outdone, but it was a great atmosphere. I'll tell you more about that as we go on. Um,
well, I,
David, were you
I
at
just
a
want
big
to know, but I just want to say the funny thing is when we were covering Survivor UK, you made a joke. We were talking about something, and I just about made him spit out his tea. This is a video or an audio podcast, but yeah. You made a joke, and you were like, "What? Do people get together and dress up for parties to watch the episodes or something?" And you were shocked when I said, "Well, yes, actually, they do." And now here you are. You have become that
I
person.
know I have, and I no regrets. I had a great time. David, did you watch the finale surrounded by hundreds of people dressed as Claudia Winkleman?
I did not. I watched the finale surrounded by myself. So Yeah, I have to say, coming into the episode, um, it was, yeah. Well, we'll talk about that later, before, once we get closer. But yeah, I no, I did not go to a watch party. It's funny because both of the people who I have co-hosted with this weekend were at watch parties because Laura, who was my guest, or well, I say our guest, but you weren't there, so I guess my guest on the Traders US podcast, had been to a Traders US watch party where there were a bunch of, like, it was hosted by a Survivor player, and there were a bunch of other Survivor players there and just other people. So, and of course, there's, in the Traders US, there's overlap in those groups because they repurpose the previous contestants.
Yeah, yeah. So it's I think it's time to set up what we always do. We have our own game of betrayal and deception. This is the Trader Traitor. Our not so secret mission from here on in is to tell one lie to one another. The lie has to be a fabrication or a made up fact, big or small, about the traitors or about ourselves or anything else. For example, I could lie and tell David that since the finale aired, Jazz has messaged me on Instagram to tell me to stop bothering him.
Yeah.
However, I couldn't lie and say I think Molly really deserved to win this season, when in fact I don't really believe that at all. That would
Oh,
be a
come
fake.
on, man.
Poor Molly. Yeah, well, she's lovely, but
Yes.
not a deserving winner, I wouldn't say.
Yeah, yes.
So if I claimed that it would be a fake opinion, we are looking for fake facts in this game, not fake thoughts and feelings. At the end of the episode, David and I will put our traitor hunting skills to the test and decide what we thought the other person's lie was. David, you've already mentioned this last time. We played this on our US episode 4 recap, I believe. I was
Hmm.
victorious. Do you think it's time to bring me down a peg?
I do, which means that I have to, have a better memory than a goldfish, because people who are listening to that will realize I did pick out the lie and then forgot about it 5 minutes later. So,
See, that happens to me in every episode. I always know the lie. I just forget by the time I get to the end. That's the problem.
well, good.
And
Do that this time too.
we'll do that this time, and our game begins now. Before we dive into the finale, actually, what we'll do now is talk about a couple of questions about the show in general. I have had a question on X from Magnus Bryn. Magnus is a long-time listener of the podcast and often sends messages about updates from various international versions that I haven't seen. Magnus asks, should the players be informed that a banished traitor was recruited or not? So, like, for example, with Ross, Ross was banished very recently, stands up, tells everyone that he's a traitor, off he goes. Should he be allowed to say that he was recruited? Should he have to say that he's been recruited? Does Claudia do that job? What do you think about this, David?
So it's interesting because after I watched that episode, I messaged you and said, "Ooh, here's something you should discuss on the podcast," not realizing that because you're 6 hours ahead, you had not only are you 6 hours ahead, but it takes a little while for the TV waves to get to the US. Um, not realizing you'd already recorded the podcast. So, but I thought that Ross revealing that he was Diane's son, although it was a great moment, could make the faithful realize he'd probably been recruited, because otherwise he would have murdered his own mother in the game.
Yeah, I think what ends up happening is they just assumed, oh, what a great traitor, he was so devious and he did
Mm-hmm.
that to his own. We didn't see them question
No,
at all that, oh, that's quite strange that he did that. Yeah, I think they just thought, oh, he was ruthless, he did whatever he had
mm-hmm.
to do. Maybe they did question it, but we don't see it in the edit. Uh,
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's possible they just decided it wasn't worth showing. I mean, on the Traders US, this season, there's a couple, and one member of the couple, this is not really a spoiler. It happens very early. One member of the couple gets murdered very early. And some questions start circling about the other member of the couple. And so they're at least considering, okay, could this person, would this person have done this as a cover to protect themselves if they were a traitor? Here we see nothing. But, so, that relates to that issue. And also sometimes we will see traitors get up and say, at the Circle of Truth, I have been a traitor since day one. Um, I don't think we've ever seen someone say, I was recruited to be a traitor. Maybe we have, and I just don't remember it.
No, as far as I
Um,
can remember.
so I'm guessing they're told not to. And I don't think they should. I think that's too much information. I think part of the idea is hiding that. Now, you could say the game is already balanced in favor of the traders, and it is. But then again, the show is called The Traders, not The Faithful.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to balance it back a little bit, then sure, you could have them say, I was recruited or I'm a new trader or whatever. I mean, can you imagine how this game would have changed? This season, this ending. And as I say that, I realize that maybe it wouldn't have because they didn't realize there were four traders to begin with.
Yeah.
So it's still possible that it wouldn't have changed. Um, but certainly some thoughts would have. I don't know. I think that's giving away too much information personally.
Yeah. I probably agree. I don't think I don't think a banished traitor should have to reveal that. I wouldn't mind if they were given the choice and and it would be up to the traitor then to either be want to sort of help the faithful in that last moment and tell them,
Hmm.
or maybe they feel some sort of allegiance to fellow traitors and
Yeah.
they're going to say as little. So maybe they should be given the freedom to say what they want. And I think you're right. It could potentially have an impact on
Hmm.
where the game goes, particularly if they are near the end, like with Ross in this series.
Yeah,
So
I do think, sorry, I do think it would have been a fun speech. I mean, obviously Ross already had a fun speech, but if he had said something like, those of you who thought that I was a traitor for all this time, you were wrong. And then they'd have all gone, And he said, because I was just recruited yesterday, I'm a traitor, and then walks off.
yeah,
And so, because some of them were like patting themselves on the back, like,
like Zach.
Jazz, well, right. And Zach, like, oh, yes, I knew it. I knew he was a traitor. No, you were wrong for 90% of the time. You thought he was a traitor.
Yeah. Um, so thank you to Magnus for
Yeah.
that question. Definitely something that people have been wondering about very recently with the UK series. One more thing I'll mention for now is just a social media account, and I keep meaning to give a shout out to this on the podcast, and I keep forgetting. There is an X account. They may be on Instagram as well at Traitoralytics, as in the word traitor and the word analytics put together. So
Mhm.
Traitor, Lytics, and it's an account run by a woman who is listens to the podcast, and she puts loads and loads of time and effort into making. If you're particularly into sort of statistics and numbers and facts and figures, she makes infographics to show you visually what the results of each roundtable are, who voted for who received the most votes, and she runs simulations. I This is sort of not something I'm very familiar with, and it's all a new world to me. But she runs simulations of which players are most likely to win particular series
Hmm.
based on voting patterns and habits and relationships and things like that. So she has been posting all the way through the series these sort of like infographics and images of statistics and numbers and figures. So if you want to dive more into those sorts of things, I would check out that page at Traitoralytics.
Okay.
I think we are ready then, David, to go ahead and begin our deep dive into episode 12, the finale episode. Oh,
Well,
not just yet.
not just, yeah, yeah. I just wanted to say, like coming into the episodes, since Since it's been two whole podcast episodes since I've been on, um, um, I did, coming in, I was fully on board the Harry will win bus. I did not see any other real option, as I have been for most of the series. I figured he'd somehow get rid of Andrew and take Molly to the end. Or I thought there was a slight possibility he'd go to the end with Andrew and do split or steal
Hmm.
and then fake him out and keep it all, which would have just been heart wrenching, even more so than with Molly, I feel like.
Yeah.
But I figured more likely Molly, just based on the edit we had seen, the number of times Molly was saying, I fully trust you, I fully trust you, while as Andrew was saying, I don't trust you, I don't trust you.
Yeah.
Um, so I vowed to avoid social media. So I would not accidentally get spoiled, as has happened almost every time during this season. Um, and then some idiot posted a comment on one of my YouTube shorts from a week ago. So, at the end of the podcast, I always talk about these that I post. I post every day. A week old one. It was related. It was about this show, but it was unrelated to obviously the outcome. And he just posts a comment congratulating the winner by name. And it's like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And the problem was, since I have a YouTube creator account, I get notified when people comment on my videos, and it includes the first line of the comment.
Yeah.
And so there it was. It popped up. I was spoiled. It never occurred to me to silence YouTube account notifications, because who would do that? And so, yeah, this pops up. And then on top of it, a couple more people commented on other shorts and did the same thing. Now, there were a couple who commented and said, spoilers for the Traitors UK finale. Click read more if you want to know. Those are fine. Those are great. Good. Comment on my videos. Just don't spoil it. But to just post spoilers, I don't understand the thought process of someone like that. And so I responded to one of them and said, what the hell are you thinking? But then a few minutes later, I was like, you know what? I don't want anybody else to accidentally stumble on this.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to delete all these different comments, except the ones that had a spoiler warning.
Hmm.
Now, one of them must have noticed that I deleted it, or he was the one who got the response, but then like clicked on the notification for the response and nothing was there. And because this morning when I woke up, I saw that he posted an apology comment. But think, people, come on.
Yeah, it's really frustrating. I had a similar experience with Traitors Canada. I knew who was going to win because of a comment that appeared via a notification. It was very frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I would have guessed that was your lie, but you told me about this way before we started recording. So I'm going to believe you. I think this really did happen, which is and yes, you've had like the last 4 episodes or something. You've had the outcome spoiled, which is very annoying.
Yes, yes. And usually it's been on Twitter, partially my fault, partially people not using hashtags the way they should be used. But you know, I will on Twitter at least, like I live tweet shows sometimes, well, a lot of the time. So yeah, I will not complain about it there. People are watching live in the UK, fine. I understand that. But a random YouTube video, that's just I don't understand that. Um, Now, moving past my anger at that, another thought that I had from the prior episode, and the funny thing is, as we're talking, literally a comment popped up on my computer about something related to a Traitors video that I made. And it's like, what are you doing, people? Another thought that I had from a prior episode was Harry's quote unquote big decision of whether or not to keep the the 7,000 pounds from when he pulled the sword out of the
Yeah,
stone.
yeah, yeah.
And I unfortunately I listened to a little bit of the last podcast, but couldn't keep up with everything. Um, and to me, there wasn't much of a decision there because one, he was in such a great spot, so why take the chance of ruining it? Two, he was in such a great spot, why worry about it when he was probably going to win anyway? And honestly, I'm not sure it would have been a good idea for anyone to take it other than Jasmine, who knew she was almost certainly getting banished.
Yeah, these were my thoughts.
Okay. And the funny thing is, this reminded me of the show on Netflix called The Trust,
Yes, yes.
because I would have said they stole this idea from The Trust, except The Trust just literally just aired. And, it's a very similar idea to a lot of the offers made in The Trust. But by the way, just because I'm mentioning The Trust on this show, that is not an endorsement. Seriously, don't bother watching the show. It was terrible.
Okay, oh well, there goes our next spin-off series.
Yeah, yeah.
I haven't watched it. So I'm
Save your time.
I'm going to take your advice and probably not. Uh you
All right.
also reminded me there, just speaking of spoilers and things, I know some people may be listening and thinking how hypocritical you two complaining about spoilers. Matthew, you spoil things all the time on here. I think it's a wee bit different because this is a podcast about the traitors that you kind of actively have to go out of your way to listen to. I, I've really this whole season I've avoided ruining anything from series one of Traitors UK. I haven't talked about
Mm-hmm.
winners, anything like that. But if I mention something from another international version, it's I think that aired months and months ago. I think that's not really a spoiler, and you're taking your chances listening to an analytical traitors podcast there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even, I had someone comment on one of my videos, one of the different sites, I don't remember which, on what was it? On Wednesday about a video that I had posted that related to an episode from that I or sorry, yeah, to an episode that had aired last Friday, which I think was when Ross was recruited. And so I always wait a few days. I either put a spoiler warning or I wait a few days. And so this person said, "Thanks a lot. I hadn't seen this episode yet." And I was like, "It aired Friday. Today's Wednesday. I can't. I'm posting literal videos about that. I can't wait a year to post these videos. No one will care."
Yeah, and even if you do wait a year, you'll still get a
Right,
complaint.
right. Yeah, there'll still be someone who says, "Hey, I hadn't seen that season yet. Yeah, I'm really sorry." So
So I think we're ready to go for it, right?
we are ready.
We're ready. Here we go. Episode 12, the finale episode of the Traitors UK Series 2. The episode begins with this sort of montage of voices speaking to us as we swoop across the Scottish Highland Hills. Of course, there's like a couple of sound bites from throughout the series. Of course, they've included Diane and her Paul couldn't be my son, but Ross is.
Hmm.
To which, by the way, again, I'm watching this in a bar with hundreds of Traitors fans. Everyone is like cheering. There were a couple of people dressed as Diane too, um, with their shiny glasses of their fizzy rosé. Uh, we're reminded of what happened in the previous episode. At the last mission, they won £7,000. Of course, you talked a little bit about that. Harry did have the chance to take it for himself, but he didn't. At the round table, Jasmine is the one who goes, but Molly was suspicious of Andrew, and they show us a little clip of that. And again, I mentioned this last week, but pay attention to the recaps at the start of the episode. They are showing you these clips because they want you to remember something for a reason. So showing us Molly being suspicious of Andrew implies that's going to carry over into this episode somehow.
Hmm.
We also then get some individual shots of each of the remaining players sort of walking into the castle or walking down the corridors. And again, and me watching this with a big crowd of people, you could hear the who had the most support. So
Hmm.
Jazz appears and that everyone is cheering and going wild. Harry appears. Some Lots of people were booing. It was really actually fascinating hearing like a big crowd's the majority response to people. So yeah, people were like booing for Harry, and I was with a group of people, and someone I was with really really didn't want him to win and was really mad at him. And I've talked about it plenty on the podcast already, but I think just because he's a traitor doesn't mean he doesn't deserve to win. So
Yeah,
we'll
and it's interesting because later in the episode, I think at the very end of the episode, Harry seems to kind of predict this reaction
yeah
because there's one confessional where he says some people I don't remember the exact quote. Some people might think I'm a bad person, don't think that I was just playing a game or something like that. So he he seems to predict that. Now maybe he saw US season 1 and that's why he knows that some people will think that, but it is interesting that people still feel that way. I mean, it speaks to the popularity of the game, but it also speaks to some people not understanding the game,
yeah
in my
even
opinion.
yeah. And even this morning on again, I'm in sort of Facebook groups that are dedicated to Traitors fans, and there was a comment saying, clearly a reference to the outcome of this episode. A comment said, or a post, I would rather have friends I trust than money. And every response was, you're watching the wrong TV show then. Like,
Yeah,
I would rather have money and maybe real friends who I didn't just meet 2 days ago. So it's people get carried away.
yeah, and Harry also talked about that. I've got a video I'm preparing on that very topic, which is, it's a clip of him saying, um, basically, I'm here to get money for my family who has been with me for 22 years. Now, he didn't add not just a week and a half, like I met these people,
Yeah.
but the implication is there, which is no, he's there for the people who truly have mattered to him his whole life, not for someone he just met. And that's the way it should always be played.
Yeah, of course.
So I did want, as the players did their intros, one thing stood out to me, and it actually relates to what we were talking about. Evie saying, all you have to do is be genuine and honest and a good faithful. And I know on Twitter she has shown more than that. But I'm sorry, Evie, but that's just not true at all. And we're going to find that out. But no, being genuine and honest and a good faithful may get you far in the game, but you're probably not going to win.
Yeah, it's a nice sort of sentiment, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not a tactic.
Right.
It's not a way to win the game. So yeah, it's frustrating to hear to still hear these things from someone who's made it to the end, and you're like,
Yeah.
no. Now that the scene has been set, then it's time for breakfast. Not for me. It's time for breakfast at the
Yeah.
show. And Andrew arrives first, and he talks about, the fact that he struggled with being a traitor, and how he's actually really proud of how he's done in the game. And it's really emotional, like last episode.
Mm-hmm.
He seems like a really good guy. He seems very, very sort of earnest. Harry arrives next, basically says he's loved the experience and he's loved being a traitor, actually, which is so funny in contrast to Andrew saying how difficult he's found it. And Harry's like, I've loved being a traitor. And I do think surely that helps, right? It helps if you just appreciate the gameplay. If you're a traitor, I get kind of against your will, and you can't detach your emotions from that. I it's got to have an impact. I think the fact that Harry is just enjoying it helps him be good at it.
I
And
think so too. And, they even, Claudia discussed it a little bit on Uncloaked. The idea of how they pick the traders, the people who are really interested in being the traders compared to someone who might be recruited and wasn't so interested, and that's why they weren't picked originally. So,
yeah,
uh, yeah, I definitely now I do think Andrew has done a good job, and we heard him multiple times say, "I have to keep my emotions separate," but it was just more difficult for him.
Yeah. And Harry is, he does realize that it'll be really hard at the end,
Hmm.
but his motivation to win overrides any of that all the way through. We even see him talking to Andrew at breakfast, and it's because it's just the two of them at first, and he says, "I told you we'd be here." And I kind of I felt this for the past couple of episodes.
Hmm.
I think Harry all along has known exactly what he's going to do to Andrew. I you know, I he's kind of acting like maybe we'll both take it to the end. I don't think Harry ever really believed that, but maybe we'll talk about that more as we get towards the end game.
Yeah, or we could just, yeah, talk about it now. I think he may have at times convinced himself, much like we've heard traders say, you just have to convince yourself you're faithful when you're with the other faithful.
Yeah,
And so, I think he may have convinced himself that he would, but when he really looked at it later, yeah, I agree with you. He knew he had to get rid of him.
yeah. Molly arrives at breakfast next. She's totally shocked to still be here, still not realizing why she's still here. And the thing is, it's she's generally just a very sweet girl. She seems
Hmm.
lovely. She just seems like a very nice, genuine person. It just that just has done her badly in this game, but outside the game, I'm sure she's really great. Jazz is next. Again, this crowd I'm watching it with are going wild when Jazz walks in. It's funny because there's a little flashback. They show sort of these montages of their
Hmm.
time throughout the show, and there's a flashback to something that I had completely forgotten. Back in episode one, their very first mission was setting up these floating pieces in the loch, and Jazz dove into the water to go get a shield, and that reminded me, oh, he's been in game mode this whole time. I sort of wasn't really that aware of Jazz very early on,
Right.
but this just made me think, oh yeah, he's really been strategizing cleverly from the get go. He knew right away, might as well get shields whenever you can.
Hmm.
He says that he's hopeful that there's just one traitor, but actually they could all be traitors around him. So he's still, keeping an open mind. He's not ruling out anything, which is wise, but as we'll see, doesn't really end up doing him any good. Uh, Evie's next. She's the final Scot. Hooray! I kind of not really thought
Woo!
about this that much. And she also, it's funny, she reflects on the missions and she says that it's one of the main reasons I wanted to come was to take part in the missions. It reminds me a bit of something I said a few episodes ago that although as viewers sometimes we can say, oh, who cares about the missions? They're the boring part. And again, I was with a group of friends, and two of them when I was watching it last night live, two of them got up to just go and get a drink at the bar at the mission because they were like,
Ha.
oh, this is the bit that I can miss. But for the players themselves, actually, it must be really fun and just that a point in the process where they can relax a bit and not be so stressed out with constantly questioning people around them. So from their perspective, I'm sure it's great fun.
Yeah, and I think we saw that on this is not a spoiler, on the Traitors US episode 5, the one that just aired this week. The mission that they did, they were running around having a blast. I mean, they were going crazy. Just, they were making Alan Cummings laugh. They were, one guy was running around with his hands in his air, waving them around. So you could tell this was fun for them.
Yeah.
And it's funny because one thing we discussed on the podcast for the US episode 5 was although that mission was done in the UK series, they didn't act the same way. And so we were debating, is it just because you have newbies versus returning reality TV people who know how to make TV, or is it because the British are just too reserved and these are Americans and they're going crazy?
Probably both.
Yeah.
Claudia then arrives at breakfast and she's wearing a sort of jacket that's got the word traitor question mark on the back. It's a little bit like I think it was at the BAFTAs or it was one of the award ceremonies last year when the traitors did really well. and she had a similar. I think she had a jacket that said "faithful" on the back. That I may be wrong, but it was a nice little thing that I don't know if everybody noticed. She tells him that the prize is £75,150 so far. Has a bit of a chat, and then says something that I've watched the episode twice now. I still don't understand what she says next. She goes, "Has anyone seen my parrot?" And then she walks off. My first thought was, oh, this is just a silly callback to that episode where they had to do bird calls and she had that
Hmm.
silly stuffed bird beside her. But then as the episode goes on, I think, oh, is it because the mission was kind of on a pirate ship of sorts? So it's a pirate. Like I would have a parrot if I was a pirate. Like, do you get the parrot joke? I don't.
I I had forgotten about it, but since you mentioned it, yes, I'm thinking that it must have been related to a pirate. And the funny thing is that didn't Andrew, as they were saying, parrot, 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 and then didn't Andrew say pirate?
Yeah,
And one of the women said that's just a different word that starts with P.
yeah.
Um, and so, but it turns out he was right.
Yeah, yeah. I think maybe he was just thinking a bit differently, and they didn't.
Yeah.
It was Evie didn't understand what he was on about. Anyway, a little bit of levity. So after Claudia leaves, we see some discussion around the house. Harry and Andrew are playing. Well, I think it's snooker. I always call it the billiards room. I don't know the difference between billiards, snooker, and pool. They're playing one of those games. They're playing a
I
game on a green table.
I believe. See, this is something I'm not sure of. I believe billiards doesn't have holes.
Oh, okay.
I could be wrong about that, but something takes me back to thinking and so I was wondering because it didn't look like pool balls, but it had holes. So I was figuring either I'm wrong about billiards, which still could be true, or yeah, I didn't even think about snooker
Yeah.
because that's just not something that we play in the U.S.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah, I think it's probably snooker. Wait, if there's no holes in billiards, what are you doing?
I
Just
don't know.
rolling some balls around the table.
That's always been my question as well. I'm sure someone will explain it to us in the comments, though, especially if I'm wrong.
Yeah. Evie is in the house as well, and I'm saying that as if she wouldn't be. Evie's also there. She gets a bit upset because she seems like she feels like her fate has already been decided no matter what, and she kind of knows what's going to happen. Her and Molly go off, they have a little chat in the kitchen. And there's this funny moment here because Andrew goes off to comfort her. Again, he seems like just a lovely guy and he
Hmm.
gives her a hug. And while Andrew's out comforting her, Harry, meanwhile, is still in the snooker slash billiard slash pool room, and he's plotting with Jazz. And I just and he's saying to Jazz, it's definitely one of the other three. And I thought this little moment encapsulated the whole game. That Andrew is a traitor, but he's too nice of a guy, whereas Harry is a traitor and he's just too good at it that he's taking any. So Evie's
Yeah.
out crying, and he is like, "I'm taking this chance to talk about her and get her banished." Well, I mean, and why not? Outside, then they walk out into the grounds. Molly hasn't noticed that there have been two giant stag statues this whole time, and while they're looking at that, a helicopter appears or a chopper appears. It's time for the mission then. Claudia,
So,
yeah,
so before the mission, I don't know. I need to do a better job when I'm not recapping. I need to do a better job of like noting where my notes come in because sometimes I get a little lost if you don't happen to mention it exactly. But like I had a note about the traitor question mark jacket. I'm like, okay, so this happened after that, so that's good. But I think it was in this discussion or like a confessional. Jazz was trying to figure out if he should bring the information he has about Harry telling Paul about their conversation to the round table. And I know this happened before the mission, so it must have happened at some point in here. And my thing is, um, okay, if you don't bring it to the round table, when are you planning to mention it exactly? I mean, I know he's slow played this whole game, and I have credited him for that. But to even question, should I bring it? It reminds me of something that was said on this week's U.S. episode, and again, not a spoiler, about a player who had not been giving any thoughts, and another player was like, "When are they going to do it? After they've been murdered?" And that's exactly what I'm thinking about Jazz here. It's like if you're not going to bring it now, when?
Yeah, I I know I feel like although like you, I've credited Jazz throughout as a great player, and maybe this is kind of his one downfall is he's left everything like sort of at one episode too late. I also saw a
Yes.
comment on X about this saying, and I hadn't really thought about this, saying that in the previous episode there was no murder. So people were saying, Jazz, you're not going to get murdered, so you've got nothing to worry about now. Why don't you just lay it all out on the table? Although I would say, yes, he wasn't going to get murdered, but he still could have been banished. So
And he was, yeah, that's what he was worried about. He said later in the episode, like, oh, it could blow back on me and I could get banished. And
yeah,
I'll
but
I'll have more thoughts on that, but why don't you at least mention it here?
yeah, yeah. So Claudia jumps out of the helicopter. It makes me think of like Joe Biden jumping out a helicopter on the grounds of the White House or something. Like we just always get those shots in the news of like Biden or his predecessor jumping out the helicopter. So and Claudia is very presidential, of course. Then it's so silly because they swap places. So she gets off the helicopter, they get on it to then just go and meet Claudia at the
Yeah.
same place. How is she going to get there? She teleports in space and time because they do this tour of the Highlands. It's an amazing free tourism promo for Scotland, by the way. It looks beautiful.
Hmm.
They arrive. Claudia's here in, I think, a different outfit. And I'm like, how long were you in that helicopter? How did she get here? Anyway, she
I
tells
mean,
them
you're
that
the one who lives there. How far away was that from the castle?
I, I have no idea. I have seen so little of my own country. It's pathetic. I have seen more of the States than I have seen of my own tiny Scotland. So yeah, where I live in Scotland is literally hundreds of miles from Inverness, and I have never been to Inverness, so it's shameful, I know, but they could be anywhere. They could have flown to Iceland for all I know, and I wouldn't have recognized it. So Claudia explains the mission. There's going to be a traitor ship, which is maybe where the pirate joke comes in about being a pirate, because she's got like
Hmm.
big sort of frilly collars. I think she's is supposed to be a little bit of a play on a pirate outfit. And there is £10,000 available if they can make it to the ship on time, but also if they can find extra flags along the way for the ship by taking detours. There will be another £10,000 available. Of course, if they don't get back to the ship in time, because sometimes they fail these missions and they don't win any money, they'll lose
That's right.
everything.
I mean, it happens with regularity.
Yes, it's the stakes are really high, and they have 60 minutes to do all of this. It's basically a sort of a orienteering course. It's like being in the
Yeah.
scouts or something. Uh, and of course, the players decide they're going to take the detours along the way because they know they'll win. So they,
Yes, exactly.
yeah, as if they're not going to take that chance. So they do things like they pull some lobster traps that apparently set up by Matthew from Survivor UK.
Yes, exactly. Damn it, you stole my joke. Yes, yeah, and he obviously left them unlocked for them. So
Yeah. Oh, spoiler if you haven't seen Survivor UK. That's a joke. It's not a spoiler whatsoever. They do things like abseil down to the ship at one point, kind of reminded me of Australia season one. They had a big finale challenge kind of
yeah.
like this. When they're abseiling, Molly, Jazz, and Evie are the first three to go. And then it's Andrew's turn. I don't know what to say about this. Someone sent me a sort of like a GIF or a GIF of Homer Simpson like tumbling down a cliff endlessly. Poor Andrew. After what feels like 20 minutes of him falling down the cliff, he finishes. Harry then completes it in mere seconds, which makes sense. Like Harry's in the army, he probably does all this really cool physical, demanding training stuff.
Yeah, but he said the other thing was, going back a few minutes, he said in the army he fixed helicopters, but he had never been on one. And I'm
Oh,
like, I'm
wow.
like, well, okay, that tells me one of two things. Either you don't trust yourself to go up in a helicopter that you worked on, or the people you work for are kind of dicks because that would be the first thing. Like, hey, can I go up in one? I mean, I'm
Yeah.
the one who works on them.
Yeah. And they're just like, no. Maybe it's because he's so untrustworthy in general.
You said you fixed that part, but did you really? No, then they would have him go on. That would be how you test him. Let's take you on a trip and see. And he's like, ah,
Yeah, that would be a good test. Next up, they do some sort of cave exploration, whilst Claudia sends sassy messages via radio. I don't even know if they're on the other. I don't know if that radio is real. Don't know if I believe it. Um, up next, they take a speedboat to get to the ship. Harry's puking over the side. This mission is basically now, David. This won't really mean anything to you, but there's a kids show called Raven that was on, actually not even when I was a kid, but after my time. There was a BBC kids show called Raven, and it was like this. It was like an adventure show, um, and people have been posting lots about it on social media recently because the Raven was there was a man who it was a kid. It was like a adventure gameplay. Kids came, reality. Kids came on and did puzzles and things. I mean, like the Traitors, but without lying and murdering. And the guy who played the main character wore this big feathery costume. And last week, Claudia had her big fringy outfit. So people were
mm-hmm.
making funny comparisons online, like, hey, she's stolen Raven's costume. But the thing is, Raven always ended with this sort of boat mission with flat, obviously much simpler than this, but with flags on a boat and stuff. So I thought this is incredibly similar. I don't know if that was deliberate or not, but they end up having this epic rush to hoist the flags, and there's a we don't know, well, we do think we do know they're going to obviously win, but there's a shot of the ship coming round a cliff corner. The sail is hoisted fully. The crowd are going wild when I'm watching it. It was
Woo.
fantastic. So they win their
Yeah.
£20,000.
Yes, I want to say I, for one, was completely and totally shocked that they had enough time to go to all the detours and get all the money, and with just seconds to spare. It's amazing how well production can estimate exactly how long it will take
Yeah.
players to complete these missions. And I,
Yes.
I said that with as much feeling as I possibly could.
Whilst I was watching, my sister was watching back in Scotland. She sent me a text saying, "My goodness, that's amazing! They made it in the nick of time." So I think everyone's got the same sort of feeling about that. But
Yeah,
but
I've seen that on Twitter. The host of a different Traders podcast posted something about it, and I responded back with a GIF about being shocked, and he responded back and said, "It's amazing! You sent your response with only 3 seconds remaining to get back to me." So,
but you know what? It's fun nonetheless, and it's a big euphoric
yeah.
moment. So, who cares? Claudia offers them, so she says they'll have some hot chocolates when they get back to the castle, and then bit of a dampener, a round table. So we see them in the cars heading back to the castle. I don't think there's anything particularly significant other than that we get a little interview clip of Harry saying he thinks he has Molly and Jazz on side. We arrive
Mm,
back to the
he's half
castle.
right.
Well, yeah. Molly and Harry are in the kitchen, and Harry's asking her, "Who do you trust more, Jazz or Andrew?" And I think I'm gonna contradict myself now. Earlier, I said Harry had always known he was going to throw Andrew under the bus, and I do think he was. But I think for now, he's just figuring out what is Molly going to do, and how can I sort of mirror that
Right.
for now, so that she again just thinks we are best pals and we are in sync. And he says in his interview he does feel really bad. These friendships sort of go beyond the game now, but he has to do what he has to do. Uh,
Yeah.
Jazz arrives in the kitchen, and Harry then says to him, "I'm sure it's one of them," meaning Evie and Andrew.
Hmm.
And Molly even has a moment where she's talking to Harry, and I don't know the first exact sentence she says, but she finishes with, "I'd never speak to you again," implying if you were a traitor after all this time. And Harry
Yeah,
says,
because Harry says, "Well, if it was you, I reckon I'd just say fair play." And she's like, "I wouldn't."
"Yeah, yeah,
To hell with you.
yeah." And he replies to her just by saying, "Well, you don't need to worry about that because I'm not."
Right.
And obviously, she just utterly buys it. Jazz and Molly are talking uh, a little bit later on their own at some point, and there's what is a significant moment, but could have been even more significant. Jazz says to Molly, "So I actually trust you the most," and he goes on to say, "I'm going to raise a question tonight," meaning at the round table, "and I want you to really pay attention to that question and look at the person I ask to see their reaction." This is another moment that when all the people I'm watching this with are going nuts at this because we thought, "Oh,
Hmm.
this is the turning point. What does this mean? What's going to happen?" Molly, in an interview, then says that she isn't really that sure about Jazz. She doesn't know she should trust him. She says he's made some strange mistakes along the way. What what do you think, David, are the mistakes in her mind that Jazz has made along the way?
Well, for one thing, I mean, he when he was slow playing Paul, he jumped on board whoever I can't remember who was voted, who was banished before Paul.
It
Do
was
you remember who that?
Miles right before Paul.
Okay, then maybe he didn't vote for Miles, or maybe at some
Yeah.
point he lost. He was slow playing Paul so much, and he focused on someone else, and he was wrong.
Hmm.
And I've lost the details in my mind, but that was one thing that he did wrong. I mean, another thing is that Molly is just so completely bamboozled by Harry. Um, and so, she's going to look at everything you know, through that lens.
Yeah.
Now, one thing that I thought was interesting in between these conversations you mentioned, Jazz has a confessional and talks about, Harry has he's perfect. He has orchestrated everything so well. How could that be? With it, obviously, he's a traitor, and it's like, yes, he did. So
Yeah. Even, and I think I'll probably mention this at some point. Well, no, I will. I'll come back to my thoughts on what Jazz thinks about Harry. Harry and Andrew are also talking in the house alone. Harry says maybe they should stick it on Evie and Jazz. And I have this, maybe I'm completely off here. I have this perspective of Harry and Andrew at this point in the game. I feel like they've come to this understanding between them that Andrew will just not betray Harry, but they're both very aware that Harry will easily betray Andrew. It's like they've kind of both just come to accept that Andrew's going to stick as a pair no matter what, and Harry doesn't really know what he's going to do. It's
I
it's
mean,
very
Andrew
strange.
has tried to plant seeds a couple times and been shot down. Now, like you, I have further thoughts. Like when we're done, I have some wrap up thoughts about what Andrew could have done differently. But um, he's tried a couple times to gently plant seeds, and it's every single time he's done it, he's been like, "Well, what about Harry? Nobody's mentioning Harry," and they're all like, "Ah, that's because he's perfect. He's a faithful. There's no way."
Yeah.
It's hard to fight against that. But I do think he had opportunity, or he at this point in time has opportunities.
Mm.
And again, I have more to say about that later.
It's time for our first round table, or kind of it is the round table, the only round table, because from here on and after that, it's not technically round table, it's end game.
Yeah, even though they'll be at the round table, it's
Yeah.
not the round table.
We see some more slow motion arrival shots. They all walk in one by one. There's an interview clip of Jazz saying, "I just need to know if Harry's a traitor or not." So it's excellent editing. They're really building up the
Hmm.
tension. They're leaving it. It's like cliffhangers within cliffhanger, built in throughout the episode. They're teasing us along so well. Claudia speaks to them. She tells them again there is now £95,150 in the prize fund. And, does her usual. It's your time. Find the traitors. Who do you trust? All that stuff. Evie starts the discussions and basically states the obvious. She reckons that she signed her own banishment last week or last episode by confidently agreeing with Zach's theory about Harry's failed murder. And she thinks, yeah, I was so confident that it was Jasmine, but actually I've now just pinned it on myself. And Jazz speaks up and he says he's finding it difficult not to suspect her. I still don't know if Jazz actually believes that or not. I kind this is what I was going to come to. I kind of think he does. I think it's easy to give Jazz too much credit. We think Jazz is the
Mm,
detective. Jazz has got it all figured out. He doesn't really. We have to remember he's really smart.
yes.
He doesn't actually know that Harry's a traitor, and he doesn't actually know that Evie's a faithful. So although it's frustrating to see Jazz questioning her, you do have to remember, well, he is a faithful and he doesn't really know. So you know, it's just the nature of being a faithful and being a traitor, and it doesn't matter how good of
Right.
a player you are. If you're a faithful, you still don't really know anything 100%.
I mean, the other thing is, I do think at this point, Jazz had a plan. I think it's a flawed plan, as again, I'll discuss at the end. But I think he had a plan. And I don't think Evie was a part of that plan. So it didn't matter to him if they got rid of Evie. I think Evie should have been a part of that plan, but I don't think she was. And so, yeah, it's hard to say what he actually thought other than his strategy.
Yeah, I wonder if what you think his plan is what I think his plan is. I wonder if his plan was it's easier to convince one person than two people. So he thought I'll get down to three. I can maybe convince Molly more than I can convince Molly and Evie. And then, I just thought maybe Jazz
Mhm.
thought, you know what, I'm going to just have to get down to three and and,
I
ta- and take my
suspect
chance.
that was his thought, and I think that was a flawed thought. Um, but
Yeah,
yeah,
because
again,
yeah,
yeah,
Molly was maybe just never going to be the person that would work with.
yeah.
Molly and Harry chime in at this point at round table. They say they're also not sure about Evie, and at this point, they're right at the end of the gate. They just can't take a chance on anyone that they're
Mhm.
not very confident about. Obviously, Harry knows.
Yes, yes.
Molly doesn't. Jazz then asks Evie, "Well, who do you think is a traitor?" And Evie says her eyes are on Andrew because of his reaction to Ross's accusations about lying. He was so defensive about it, he got so angry.
So elusive.
Yeah. Yeah. That strange word that you
Yeah.
don't know. Then comes this moment that is just again great TV that Jazz steps in and we think he's kind of going to turn the whole game around. He says, "Can I just ask a question?" The crowd goes nuts. And by that again, if you check out the traitor, what's I don't even know what my own podcast is called. If you check out the Trader podcast Instagram stories, I couldn't help myself but film all of these crowd reactions, so you'll get to see everyone going wild at all these significant moments.
Yeah,
Um,
some of them you should post at not just as stories, because the stories may be gone by the time
yeah,
people hear this.
I think I'm going to do a sort of super cut. I'm going to edit all these
Yeah.
together for a fun little video and post that. He says, "Can I just ask a question?" And he turns to Harry. He says, "With yourself, Harry." He asks him, "Do you remember that early conversation I had with you about Paul?" And it's a link back to this, really now about 4 or 5 episodes ago.
Hmm.
Harry, I'm going to get the names all mixed up now. Jazz spoke to Harry in confidence and said, "I think Paul's a traitor. If I am murdered, it's probably because I'm right." Harry then went and told Paul this. Paul then comes back to Jazz and says, "Hey, Harry told me what you said about me." And from then on, Jazz has had that in his mind. He thought, why did Harry tell him what I said? And why did Harry never bring that up at the round table? Something weird is going on. So Jazz is finally confronting Harry about it. I say confronting, he's not particularly aggressive about it. And Harry, when Jazz asks him, Harry, it's the most hesitant I've seen him in the game, actually.
Hmm.
He it's like he's such a good actor and such a good liar, but this is the first time I thought he's really stumbling and he just sort of goes, I think so. And Jazz goes, you didn't tell him. And Harry said again, sort of hesitates and says, I don't think so. And you can really see the panic on Harry's face
Right.
because he just doesn't expect this to happen and he doesn't know which would be the best lie to tell here. Jazz, yeah, Jazz is basically saying, "Why would Harry tell Paul what I said?" And Harry sort of he makes his way out of it. He says, "Well, I think maybe I just said to Paul something like, oh, you might want to clear the air with Jazz.'" And he says, "Well, look, Paul was a traitor. He was throwing names around. He was doing whatever he could do to escape suspicion. I don't." And he finishes just by saying, I don't know what else I can say about this. I can't speak for Paul." And that's kind of it. I think Jazz is done. He doesn't really challenge it much more, and no one else seems to pitch in. So it's time for voting.
Well, yeah, on this whole Jazz thing, I this is, one of the problems is he waited too long. He waited till literally the last minute to bring up the conversation and try to catch him in a lie.
Yeah.
And then he didn't really push it when Harry stumbled. Like you said, this was the first time Harry really stumbled. And I understand Jazz is playing it slow. I get it. We've talked about how good it was, but this was too slow.
Yeah.
This was waiting too long to reveal this piece of information. It allowed Harry to pretend not to remember because it was so long ago. Um, and because it was at the final roundtable, people couldn't go back and think about it because a lot of times you have to plant the seed and then that seed grows over the next day or two.
Yeah.
And that gave no time for it. So Harry made an excuse. He blamed Paul, but Jazz couldn't go back and follow up with other players to point out and be like, hey, did you see the massive holes in that story?
Yeah.
It was just too late to make it work. And yeah, that was, I think that was Jazz's losing mistake right there.
Yeah. And I think that idea of them not being able to really confer much anymore ends up being incredibly important for the
Yeah.
remainder of the episode. So the votes come in and we pretty much know what's going to happen, right? Andrew votes Evie, Evie votes for Andrew, and the remaining three, Jazz, Harry, Molly,
Mm-hmm.
all vote Evie. So she stands up, she tells us she loves them all, she was really proud these were the five who made it to the end, wishes them good luck, and closes by saying, "Of course I'm a faithful." So Claudia comes in to speak. She says, it's not the end of the game. In fact, now the game is in your hands, and explains how it will all finish, that they get to keep voting if they want until they agree to stop voting. Or she doesn't actually say this. She explains it a little bit later in the episode. The game will end automatically when there are only two people left because they can't vote out
Yeah.
one another. And she tells them to think carefully because we are about to enter the end game. There's a little shot of Harry saying, I feel like we're all faithful. And then
Yeah. Oh, is it possible? Is it possible that we're all faithful? And it's like, no, Harry, it isn't,
yeah,
not
well,
just because obviously there are two of them who aren't, but also just the way production handles things, unless they've changed it and, adopted some of the suggestions we've made. Um, no, there's no way they're going to let it get down to five people and have them all be faithful.
yeah. And what I think probably Molly hasn't realized is there literally has to be a traitor left, sort of, or practically, because Zach was murdered and they haven't caught a traitor since. So someone murdered Zach.
Ah,
So that there just must be one left.
yeah.
And I don't think she puts that together. And actually, there's a moment of Andrew here saying something like, "Well, we can't be." Well, I think when Harry says, "Well,
Mhm.
maybe we're all faithful," and Andrew goes, "Well, we can't be." So it's pretty clear Andrew is
Yeah.
going to do something. He's not going to
Yes.
act like he thinks they're all faithful now. They have, I guess, what ends up being their last debrief, their last very short chance, probably, to talk about things. Molly and Harry again. It's a repetition, basically, of a conversation they had
Yeah.
earlier, where Molly says, "I don't think it's you, and if it is, I'll literally never speak to you again." Harry says that he thinks that Jazz is faithful, which to us implies, okay, he's going for Andrew.
Hmm.
And in his interview, he says as much. He says, uh, my best option is to take Andrew out. And again, I think he has probably always known that. Andrew and Jazz are talking, and Andrew then, and I think maybe you'll think this as well. Andrew turns on Harry so swiftly and so confidently, it's too obvious. And Jazz notices it. He just he just very quickly goes, well, it's obviously Harry. He's known every single traitor. I reckon he's been a traitor from the start. It's just overkill. And Jazz, I think, just realizes, yeah, this is too much. And I I I, I I just this is what I predicted in the previous episode of the podcast, probably even the one before that. It's playing out the way I thought it would play out.
Yeah, I expected at this point Harry would go after Jazz, that he would get together with Andrew and Molly and just go after Jazz, knowing that he could absolutely get Molly to vote out Andrew right afterwards.
Yeah.
And truly, knowing now what happened and how close it was for Harry, I do think that would have been the better move. Get Jazz out first, make Andrew still think, oh, there's a possibility that the two of us could share it. And then I don't think Molly was ever siding with Andrew. And
Yeah.
I think Andrew is a worse debater than Jazz.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
So I think he should have gone after Jazz at this point. It's a minor quibble well,
Yeah.
it ends up being a minor quibble, but it might not have been.
Although he would have had to convince Andrew to do that too, to make it not a split vote. It would have been
Um,
50-50 if Harry and Molly had gone for Andrew and Andrew and Jazz had gone for Harry.
what I'm saying is, if he had gone after Jazz, if Andrew and Molly had voted for Jazz,
Yeah.
then I mean, he could have tried to get Andrew on board, even if Andrew had voted Harry and Jazz had voted Andrew, because he would have still told him the same thing. Then it would have been 2 to 1 to 1, and they'd have still gotten rid of Jazz.
Yeah. The four of them left they're in the bar. They are, and this is another moment. It seems like they're seriously considering maybe there's not a traitor left. But again, I was just sort of thinking, of course there is. Of course there's one left, because Zach was murdered and you haven't caught a
He
traitor
was
since.
he was murdered by the ghost of a traitor.
Yeah, he was murdered by the ghost of Ross in a sort of last minute revenge. It's time for the end game then, and we get something that I'm sure is new. I don't think they did this in the first series. That Claudia sort of interviews them all again, very much like she
Mm.
did in episode 1 when she was picking a traitor, or production was picking a traitor and pretending Claudia picked. So
So, did you watch Traitors Uncloaked?
no,
Did you have a chance?
no.
So in there, I might as well I was going to mention it later, but she says keeps referring to her picking, and then at the very end says, "Well, I pick along with discussions with production."
Okay.
So she is at least insisting that she has some major say in it,
Yeah. Okay.
for whatever that's worth.
Yeah. I wonder. Yeah. I, I wonder if the producers are like, "You sure, Claudia? We'll take your opinions into account."
Yeah,
Yeah. No. I take that back. Of course, I would listen to Claudia. So, yeah, she does these sort of interviews with them, just about how does it feel? You've made it all this way. What's your plan now going into the end game? She makes Molly realize that she's the last woman, and Molly says, "Oh, I hadn't even noticed that."
hmm
And she says she won't forgive herself if she gives the money to a traitor by accident. Andrew says he's found the experience amazing. He says he sort of has a plan going into the end game, and he isn't going down without a fight. Harry is reminded by Claudia that he's the youngest traitor, and he's managed to vote out all four traitors so far. Well, not all four, because Andrew's still here for now. And she praises his shield plan. She picks out that specifically and
hmm
says that was just genius. And I do think, and it was such
Oh
a
yeah,
big, because no one has caught on. No one has figured out this
right,
this other option, that it could have actually just been that Harry was they just never questioned it enough.
right.
Jazz talks to Claudia and basically says he still does not trust anyone, and he'll stick with his gut because that's what he's been doing the whole game.
Mhm.
I don't think he's given himself enough credit there. It's not just he's got, he's been
It's his
smart
brain.
about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Claudia then explains to them again in the end. Well, what's funny is the fact that this was indoors. So this is not a spoiler. Series one, they did this outside, outside the house. I'm just guessing they had to have a contingency plan in case. Again, it's Scotland. It rains all the time.
Well,
So
she even said that. She said, while a storm rages outside, we will be having it inside.
I did not even notice that. It's because when people talk about storms in Scotland, my brain is numb to it, so I don't
Yeah.
register. Okay, so she actually says it.
Yeah. And I'm just sitting there going, oh, I hope they got fire code approval for having a big fire pit in the middle of a wooden room.
That's all I could wonder. It was how the hell are they being allowed to do this without smoke alarms going off and this whole place not burning to the ground? Anyway,
Yeah.
she talks to them about the ceremonial pouches. They'll each have two pouches, one that says endgame, one that says banish again. And if even one person chooses to banish again, they will vote. And again, Claudia does it for them. They give her the pouches. It just makes me laugh because I'm sure in the US one, I'm almost certain they in series one, the players just did it themselves. Uh
No, no. US season one, Alan did them.
oh,
It was in the
did he
most recent Australia
Australia or
where
something?
they did it themselves,
Yeah.
I
It
believe.
it just I don't know, it feels I I don't know if it's a safety thing. I don't know. It
Well, in this case, I bet it was. I bet in
well,
this
yeah.
case they didn't want people just lobbing fiery pouches all over the place, in a
Yeah.
wooden room.
I would love if they had made Claudia Winkleman do some sort of fire safety course in order to be able to present this. So they all pick their pouches and hand them over. Claudia starts to throw them in. And they all vote red, right? Jazz votes
Yeah.
to banish. He says that he's still got concerns. Molly says she would rather just feel even more secure than she does right now. Andrew immediately just names Harry. He just goes for it. He's like, I think it's Harry. He's known too much step by step. And when it's Harry's turn to explain, he does his best at acting very shocked, and he goes, "Well, that was kind of random," and then reiterates kind of what Molly said. He says, "I need to be totally certain with everyone here." So they vote again, and
Yeah. And I will say, you mentioned what Andrew said, and a few minutes ago I said that Jazz waited till the last minute, but no, Andrew truly waited till the last second to make his accusations. I mean, it was like, yeah, like you said, it's like it's Harry, and I mean, I know he had tried preparing Jazz for it ahead of time, but the best he could hope for at that point was a tie unless Harry or Molly did something at that point stupid by voting Jazz. So, he did point out. Now I'm jumping ahead to what the votes are, but he does point out he knew he couldn't change their minds. But could you have if you had tried something a little earlier? I
yeah,
don't know.
and part of me wonders if it's a sort of I can't refer to other seasons in Rune. I'm not going to spoil this. How do I say this? I wonder if it was a last ditch attempt to also maybe like, well, if I'm going out, I'm taking Harry with me. So maybe he just thought, screw it, I'm gonna make it look
Hmm.
so obvious that he's also a traitor. But the thing is, that also does not work.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
Molly votes, and of course she votes for Andrew. Andrew votes for Harry. Harry votes for Andrew, and there's a glimmer of hope that maybe there'll be some sort of tie break and Jazz will save the day, but he goes for Andrew, uh, and I at this point just thought Harry is winning. It's too late. Andrew then it doesn't have much of a speech or anything. He just kind of says, "I'm a traitor." Off he
Hmm.
goes. Molly looks like she's completely shocked and upset, and Harry's like, "No way," pretending that he's
Yeah, I mean, he kept his acting skills going here.
yeah.
Yeah, and I was surprised there wasn't a celebration like there usually is when a traitor is banished. At least among Molly and Harry. I mean, Jazz obviously, but there was no celebration. They were still very somber.
Yeah, I think at this point it's just so intense, and the money is really within touching distance. They must just be so on
Yeah.
edge. They can't even celebrate that. Claudia congratulates Andrew on playing a great game, and off he goes. Time to pick their pouches again, and here is where Claudia says, "There's no discussion about this," and I
Yeah.
sort of think, I wonder if they were allowed to talk for 5 minutes, could Jazz have said, "Look, Molly, here is why I'm going to break it down and explain it again." Could it have made a difference? I don't know. We'll never know. They they give Claudia their pouches second time round. Molly goes green. She wants to end the game, and she
Hmm.
says, "Well, I'm going on the basis that there really was only one traitor left, and we've just found him, so we can just end it." Harry also votes green, end the game, and he says he's 100% sure about Molly and Jazz. And then it's time for Jazz. He votes red. The crowd is cheering, even though I think it's futile now. And he says he's only really confident about Molly. And he feels like there's a trend of traitors trying to take out traitors at the last minute, which is and he's right. And he thinks
Yeah.
that that's what Andrew was doing. Harry then, and they kind of do speak a little bit here, I guess. I know that Claudia said no discussion, but they kind of
Hmm.
get a little bit of it. Harry defends it, and he says, "Well, I think Andrew was just doing that out of spite. Like, he
Yeah.
just was angry, and I don't know. It's not a great argument, but it's good enough for Molly." So,
Right. Right.
and so they vote, and it's this just a ridiculously intense, drawn out, difficult to watch. Molly is completely struggling with what to do. It looks like she's even crying. We see a shot of her writing the letter H, and she looks up to Harry and she sort of whispers, "It's not you," and he says it's not. And there's this even more intense moment because Claudia asks them what she always does now, are the names locked in? And she asks Harry, Jazz, Molly, and then at the last second Molly says, "Can I change it?" And I thought that production would say no. I thought Claudia would say no. If you've written your name, it's too late. But they let her, and she changes it.
I mean, there's no point in asking, is it locked in if you don't have a chance to change it? If you have to say yes, it's locked in. It's kind of like in the old Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Is that
Yeah,
your final
final
answer?
answer. Yeah, sure.
Uh, and so, um, it, so the people end up saying final answer this,
Yeah, I guess.
and
I
it,
guess.
it's funny because it reminds me. This has absolutely no bearing on anything, but it's British. So, uh, I'm rewatching newish Doctor Who, and there's some where Unit is running around
Yeah.
and they declare an actual emergency. And I'm like, is that a British thing? Actual emergency instead of just declaring emergency isn't good enough. It has to be actual emergency.
No, not particularly British, just some strange script writing.
Okay. So I thought it was like the same thing. Final answer and, locked in actual emergency. So
Yeah,
she doesn't get to her actual answer. And because, yeah, Claudia's like, no, we're not done until everybody's happy.
yeah. I guess. I mean, I, I also I was again. I'm watching it with hundreds of people, and it was
Yeah.
they had to put subtitles on because it was
Right.
everybody was excited, but it was so loud. I couldn't really
Yes.
hear everything, so I guess I was a bit confused. But Harry, it's time to vote then. Harry votes for Jazz. He says he doesn't believe that either of them are traitors, but he's got to go for Jazz if it's anyone. They're playing the music here is just fantastic. It's actually the soundtrack from the Interstellar film, the Christopher Nolan film, which is like really beautiful Hans Zimmer music. It's just so cinematic and intense. And Jazz then votes for Harry. Of course, they're going to leave Molly till last, right? And it's all built up to this moment. Molly says, "I've trusted Harry from the start, and I've had suspicions of you, Jazz." and she shows us her slate. She's gone for Jazz. It's all over. We know the horrible thing that's going to happen, or the great thing,
Yes.
depending on your perspective.
Yes.
So Jazz says, I'm a faithful, and he leaves. I think Molly just thinks they've got rid of another faithful needlessly. Oh, what a shame. I don't think she thinks, oh God,
Right.
what have
No,
I done?
absolutely.
She's
Yeah,
just like,
absolutely.
oh, shouldn't have done
Yeah,
that. What a shame.
she never, I mean, she wanted to end the game,
Yeah,
so in her mind, Jazz just cost himself 30,000 pounds.
yeah,
So yeah, I think she's fine. I mean, I am surprised that she actually wavered between Harry and Jazz in that final vote and originally wrote down Harry's name. That shocks me that she even considered that, but in the end, she couldn't do it.
yeah,
As I think all of us had figured since for a while now, it was just a lot closer than I expected, which, you know, one last moment decision makes the difference of almost 50,000 pounds for herself and Jazz.
yeah.
But
I think she was about to vote for Harry, A, because maybe what Jazz said earlier did
mhm.
make her question things. Maybe she did find it strange and it's stuck in her head. Or, and what a lot of people online were have been going crazy about and posting, saying, Molly, you're an idiot. A lot of people online are saying, well, it doesn't make sense that Jazz is a traitor because why would he have voted to banish again? If he was a traitor, he would have just also ended the game. So maybe that made Molly think, this is weird. Why is he voting again? However, right, this is a spoiler alert that I'm just going to talk about. If you have not seen US Traitors season one, skip ahead 60 seconds. This happened at the end of that season with Cerie. She probably could have just ended the game when there were four left, but she did, and she was a traitor. She chose to keep going and vote out Ari. And at the time, when I watched it, I thought, why is she doing this? But it worked and she won. So you can be a traitor and continue to vote to banish when you don't really need to. She just didn't want to split the money with Ari.
Right.
So yeah, people online, why would Jazz have voted to banish again? I can understand that a traitor might still do that. So
Yeah, I mean, and in that case, Molly's screwed no matter what. If she's up against
yeah,
two traitors at that point, she's screwed no matter what. And it comes back to, I think, what we were just saying. She believed all three of them were faithful at that point, and that was her overwhelming belief.
yeah,
And Jazz almost got there. He
yeah.
came so close. I mean, you literally cannot get any closer than he got, but just couldn't do it. And again, I think it's in part because he waited too long.
Yeah, waited too long and was up against two people who had become incredibly close, and he
Right.
just could not make a wedge between a
Yeah.
friendship. So
Yeah.
Claudia then she's left with Molly and Harry. She tells them, "You're the last two players. If you're both faithful, you'll share the money and so on." It's time for them to reveal their status, and Molly very sort of naively just sort of smiles and says, "I'm a
Hmm.
faithful." She's so relieved. And Harry, he keeps up the pretense right till the end. He's smiling, he's trying to look like he's excited about this win he's about to share. And then he says, I am, and since the start have been a traitor. And it's just this fantastic or awful moment that Molly she's absolutely devastated. She starts swearing. She just walks out. She just can't even bear to be there. She leaves. We see her go off. I mean it whether if she even if she didn't play a smart game, it's still really tough to watch. It's a
Yeah.
horrible moment. And we see a bit of her in her interview saying that she wrote his name down, she changed it, she just couldn't bring herself to do it. But she does admit, she says, well, do you know what? He played a great game, fair play to him. So I thought
Right.
that's quite, even though she said she was never going to speak to him again, I thought
Right.
that's pretty impressive that at least she's able to say he played a good game.
Yeah. And, spoiler alert from the Uncloaked, they are friends again. So, that's good. But yeah, she was broken. at that moment.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think Harry even had a little problem saying it because so I posted the congratulatory video on my TikTok, etc. And so I watched that clip multiple times. And I think he left out the word have. I think he says like I am and always and then pause and then says been a traitor. And I think the word have got lost in there somewhere.
It did. I noticed the
Yeah.
exact same thing. Yeah, yeah. So I mean, no wonder he's like
Yeah.
incredibly nervous at this moment about what he's
Yeah.
about to do. So it's Harry left. He's won. He's with Claudia. She congratulates him on an extraordinary game. He has won £95,150. She says, "You're 22 years old and you've beat everyone." And we get Harry in his interview again talking about his family. He did it for them. And outside the castle, he shouts, "I'm the best traitor in the world," followed by, "I hope Molly didn't hear that."
Yeah, that was hilarious.
And
And
the,
I just want to point out to a previous trader on a different series of the show who said they were the best trader in the world. And I mean, they were disproven that no, you are not. Harry, there will be debates, I'm sure, about who is the actual best, but Harry certainly has a claim to it, whereas that person does not.
yeah, absolutely. I think he's quite right in saying that. And the episode ends there. I've got one or two thoughts, but David, I know what you want to talk about Andrew a little bit and how you think he could have played differently and saved the game. What might Andrew have done?
Yeah, so I've got a few thoughts about Andrew. I've mentioned some things about Jazz, but expand on that. So Andrew, I think, much like Jazz, waited too long to make his move. Um, you know, Harry had Molly completely in his pocket. They were an unbreakable duo for voting. Everybody should have known that. He needed to get Evie and Jazz on his side at the previous vote. And I really feel like he could have if he had played it right. Evie knew she was on the chopping block. So if Andrew came to her and said, "Hey, I'm working on a 3 to vote for Harry. It will save you. He is a traitor. Let's do this." Evie would have been incredibly foolish not to jump on that.
Yeah,
And then Jazz, we know already had suspicions. So if he had approached Jazz, now that one would have been a little bit more difficult because you never know where Jazz's mind is exactly. I mean, we knew, but obviously he didn't know. But you got to try. You know that Molly is off limits. Try the other two. That was his only move at that point, and he didn't make it because I just don't think I like Andrew a lot, but his mind does not work in the same way in terms of strategic thinking. And so I don't think it occurred to him.
yeah. It's like you mentioned earlier that he, of course, was a recruit, not an original traitor chosen by production. So he presumably didn't really want to be a traitor or didn't think he
Mm-hmm.
would do a good job. And as far as I remember, that is why he was recruited because Paul and Harry reckoned he would be a good uh, option for
Right.
sabotage. A sort of scapegoat, recruit him, throw him under the bus. So even they knew he probably wasn't particularly suited to it.
Yeah. And then, like I said, I've already mentioned this a couple times. Jazz, same thing. He waited too long. I mentioned that earlier. And I think that was just especially true at the end game. He could have gone again with Evie and Andrew at Final Five.
Yeah,
He could have uh, uh, tied the vote at Final Four, and at least maybe something would have happened. Instead, he waited until Final Three. I mean, I thought there was zero chance of Molly turning on Harry. As we discussed, it turned out that there was more than zero chance, but it still ended up, not happening. And just imagine if Jazz had given his thoughts more time to sink in. So Molly didn't have to make an absolutely, completely last minute decision when she felt like she was screwing over her best friend.
yeah, yeah. I
So, so yeah, I think those are the two things, those two people could have done. They're both the same thing, really. Move sooner.
yeah. Before I sort of get your overall last impression of the series as a whole, I had a thought last night when I was watching the show too. I was I was around a table with a group of friends and a couple of people I just met yesterday. So there was someone there who actually a fellow Scot, and I said, "Oh, who do you want to win?" or something like that, and he said, I don't watch this show." So I was with someone who was just there because his friends were there, but didn't. He knew what the show was. He hadn't watched it. So I was like, "Oh, you're not going to know what's going on," and he was like, "Yeah, I'll get the hang of it." So he watched. I think he liked the idea of it, and we had a chat afterwards. And he was saying, "Oh, so you do a podcast about this?" And he was asking questions about the podcast, and he said, "Oh, I guess that's quite unusual that a traitor won." And I said, "No," and he went, "Oh, surely it's really difficult to do what that guy just did." And I was saying, "No, it's far easier for a traitor to win." And he was going, "What? And other versions of traitors won?" And I said, "Yeah." And I was trying, I mean, this was like a 60
Hmm.
second conversation. So I was saying, "Oh, yeah, it's much easier because this and this. It's definitely weighted in the traitors to their advantage." And he said this thing that's so simple, but I don't know if I've ever really talking about it. Maybe it's quite obvious. He said, "Yeah, but that guy had to act the whole time, right up to the end." He said, "No one else had to lie." And he just made this really simple point that yes, the mechanics of the game make it easier for the traitors because they've got much more control and power and knowledge, but they do have the psychological burden of constantly having to lie and act really well. And so to this guy who'd never seen the show before, that was his takeaway. Was it must be really difficult to pretend that whole time right up until the last minute. And I thought, yeah, actually, maybe I'd never take that particularly
Hmm.
seriously. What do you think about that, David?
I mean, it's true, and we've seen, not to give any spoilers, we've seen that take a toll on certain previous traders, where they just couldn't handle it anymore. They got to know people too well. They couldn't handle taking the money away from them,
Yeah,
and so yeah, it takes a certain personality type. But I think that's the same in many of these games, whether it's, Survivor or the US version of Big Brother or
yeah,
the Mole or, uh, you know, any of these games, you're going to have to lie. You're going to get to know these people and you're going to have to either stab them in the back or find some other way to win. And so, like, on the most recent season of Survivor, there was a literal romantic ish couple that made it to the end and had to argue against each other in the final three
yeah,
and, try to say, no, I did these things. No, I did these things without like literally attacking the other one. And that's happened before. You have these friends who make it to the end, these people who have become friends over the, monthish that they've been out there. And they still have to do that. And sometimes they can't. Sometimes they fall apart at that point too. Now, this is a little different because, you know, like like your new friend said, um, only one group specifically has to lie.
yeah,
And I, I don't know that that's true. I think that the faithful have to lie a bit too.
yeah. And I
Um,
think I've mentioned this in a previous episode that
yeah,
yeah, even as a faithful, you have to pick and choose what you want to say to certain people, or sometimes you
right,
have to pretend you know you kind of know who a traitor is, but you have to act like you don't believe it.
right. And I think we're seeing more of this on the US version, but of course, the US version is made up of people who have played a lot of these types of games before. So they're a lot more used to it.
Yeah,
So I yeah, it is hard to be a trader from that standpoint, unless you have the type of personality that you need to have, which is, from my Survivor and Big Brother rules, is put your emotions aside. You have to do that. And we heard Harry talking about it. We heard Andrew talking about it, and it's just something you have to do, or else you're going to fall apart.
yeah. And again, sort of at the risk of repeating myself, there's a lot of chat online
Hmm.
from people saying, Harry, what an awful guy. How could he do this to his friend? And I just think you wake up. You are watching a
Yes.
television game show. This is not real. And I've said this a million times on the podcast. What do you want the traitors to do? Do you want them to quit because they don't want to be mean to people? Like there wouldn't be a show if there weren't traitors trying to lie to people. You wouldn't have
Yeah.
anything to watch.
Yeah. And I will say, I do have a couple of thoughts from Uncloaked, but I do want to mention that the players who lost this season are, seeing them on Uncloaked, seeing them on Twitter and elsewhere, are so much better than those types of people that you're talking about on social media and the crybabies who lost US season one. This is how a person should act after a game is over. Give credit where credit is due. Applaud the person who beat you. Don't whine about it for months and months and months. I mean, there was an article, I think we may have mentioned it either here or on the US podcast. There was an article recently, an interview from one of the losers, the losing traders from US season one, who was still whining about the person who won that season. And that guy's like a multimillionaire. So it's not even about the money,
Yeah.
And so, yeah. And again, going back to the most recent season of Survivor, one person won. And they won by backstabbing or otherwise getting rid of all these other people. And yet, literally, all of them got together, or as many as possible, for multiple screenings of the show across the country.
Yeah.
And so they're hanging out together just as friends, even though one of them won and the rest of them lost. And that's the way it should be. They shared an experience, they had a game. Yeah, you can be upset you didn't win, but don't be a bunch of crybabies. Um, so I do want to say a couple of things, even before I get to about Uncloaked, because several people asked me in comments on TikToks or on Twitter about how nobody questioned why Harry hadn't been murdered. And the thing is, I feel like Harry didn't really seem to stand out as someone who should be murdered until he helped get Paul out.
Yeah.
Until that point, he was one of several supposed faithfuls. And so it wasn't like he was target number one. And so he survived that vote. Or I'm sorry, he survived that murdering after the Paul vote. And I think Molly, like this was one of the times when Molly was almost there. Like I think she started to say something about how odd it was, but then got distracted away
She
from it.
did. Yeah.
Yeah. And then he got the shield the next time. And so, okay, he had a reason for not being murdered that time. And then they murdered Zach, who was a truly viable target, at least as much a target as Harry. So I don't think there would have been any reason to say, how did Harry survive that? Because they got rid of Zach, who was a huge, obvious faithful.
Yeah.
And, Jazz had suspicions, but as we've discussed, he was moving slowly. So I think that's how Harry did it, and plus, of course, he was just so obviously a faithful as far as everyone but Jazz was concerned. So
Yeah.
they just, he just managed to pick the targets well and pick his positions well, I think.
Yeah. Uh, I I've said this before, but I haven't watched the last three episodes of Uncloaked because I'm
Hmm.
traveling. I'm not at home right now, so I just do not have the time. David, you don't have to do my sort of 90-second wrap up, but I'll hand over to you. What you did watch Uncloaked? Anything particularly significant there?
Well, the one thing I'll say is this episode of Uncloaked, unlike all the others, was actually enjoyable because it focused on
Boo.
Claudia and the final five
Yeah.
instead of guests laughing at Ed's dumb jokes.
Yes.
I even posted on Twitter something like, if you go on, if you're a guest on this show, is like it in your contract that you have to laugh at his jokes? Because that's truly the only reason I can see for doing it. They did have a full audience at this one, so they didn't just have the few podcast producers clapping in the background.
Okay.
They had a full audience. They had all the traders there. I don't know when it was. I mean, I can't imagine they do it live. So clearly it must have been done
Yeah.
before the finale actually aired.
I think they do it a day or two before.
Okay. And so so there were some references there. But so I almost viewed it more as a reunion show than as an actual podcast.
Yeah.
And it also continues to annoy me that they're like, we're going to have this show and then we're going to tell you to switch to this other podcast to get the rest of it. It's like, screw you. Have it all in one. Come on. I'm not going to go back, find this damn podcast, fast forward to the point where you ended the video point. It's like,
Yeah.
come on. You're just making this too complicated. Plus, usually it's not worth it anyway. Um, so the few highlights. Jazz was apparently online called Jazzica Christie.
Yeah, yeah.
And he talked about how he doesn't even have Twitter. And so people were like sending him screenshots of people on Twitter talking about him. And he didn't even know who Agatha Christie was.
What?
I know, that's what I said. And then he said, so I had to look her up, and it turns out she solved like 60 murders. And I'm like, no, she didn't
No.
solve. No, she wrote about, but yeah.
Well, she concocted the murders and then solved them herself and then wrote them.
Yes, yeah. Um, and then at some point he was or in his confessional when he found out who the traitors were, or I guess who the remaining traitor was, he was like, he listed them all, but he forgot to mention Ash. So he was like, "Oh, that's this person," but he totally forgot Ash. I don't know 100%. I don't want to totally slam him for forgetting Ash. He might have been talking about those that he had pegged,
Okay.
but the way it came off to me was that he just totally forgot Ash was even in the show, which it was like rude. Um, so switching from Jazz, Molly, as I mentioned, said things between her and Harry are fine now, and she even joked that she still thinks he's a faithful. So she was able to find a little humor in that.
That's good. Good.
And yeah, that's about it that I had. I mean, it's almost your 90 seconds, quite honestly. I mean, the other players were there. I just didn't feel like they said, I mean, Harry was there. Harry, it was a decent interview, but he didn't say anything, of huge revelations. If anything, he was being modest about,
Yeah.
the way he played.
Yeah.
He wasn't yelling, I'm the best trader in the world still, or anything. And so, he said things like, they asked him, what are you going to do with the money? And he was like, well, I've always found that money doesn't make me happy. So I don't know. I'll give it to my family. I'm just happy if I have a roof over my head. And Ed was like, sure, Harry, sure.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that's about it from Uncloaked. Um, I do want to say it's been a good couple months for, like about 22-year-old British guys on reality television. We had the winner of Survivor UK and now Harry, and both of them played the naive card in the early goings.
Yeah.
So um, it's
Yeah. They're because young white guys have got a really hard time in the
yes,
UK.
yes,
Thank God they're representing. I will watch Uncloaked at some point once I'm home. I will catch it. I mean, I'll probably fast forward to the sort of reveal parts, but the finale one,
yes.
I'll watch the whole thing.
I mean, that's all that's I always fast forward. That's one thing that really bothers me about Uncloaked is it's only what 20, 30 minutes long, whatever it is. And they replay clips that you literally just
Just
saw.
watched, yeah, it's annoying.
It's like, stop it. What we remember. You don't need to show them again. You don't need to. I mean, maybe you do need to fill that time because you're just not creative enough to fill it with anything else. I don't know.
They also start every episode with a coming up on the Traitors Uncloaked. I'm like, this is like a 27-minute long show. I don't need a coming up preview. Just
Right.
get on with it. Anyway, no, I'll say no more. Uh I guess not lastly, we've got a few things to do, but final thoughts on the series as a whole. I What I'll do just now is there's a great Instagram account called I Talk Telly, and they just post sort of things about generally UK, I think, sort of viewing figures, interesting bits of information about commissions of new shows that are being cancelled, whatever. So they've posted that apparently the finale episode last night had 5.5 million viewers in the UK, which is for the UK really big numbers for broadcast
Yeah.
TV these days. That's like it says here an incredible 5.5 million people tuned in to watch the finale of The Traitors last night. That's 2.2 million more than the last final and another series high. So it's obviously been a massive success. How does the season rate for you, particularly compared to other versions you've seen?
I mean, I definitely enjoyed it. I like the mix of personalities. I like the winner, despite people who would say, "Oh, we didn't like it." No, I will root for whoever plays the best game. If Jazz had made the moves I think he needed to make and won as a faithful, I would have been just as happy. I don't root for the traitors or the faithful because it doesn't make sense to do that, in my opinion. It makes sense to vote for to root for the person who plays the best game. Now I know some people root for the nicest person or whatever. And yeah, seeing Andrew win, that would have been great too, with all the things that he talked about. Seeing Jazz win would have been great with the things he talked about. Seeing Molly win would have been great from a personal perspective, not from a game perspective. Um, but Harry played the best game without a doubt, and a lot of times you look at the game and it's like, oh, they really got lucky. And sure, there's luck involved, but he made his own luck. He found that shield, and you could say, well, he got lucky he found that shield. Sure, somewhat, but he found it, he grabbed it, and he concocted a whole plan around it.
Yeah, chose to keep it secret, figured out why
Yeah.
that would be beneficial.
And so and that's what he did throughout. He had these plans. He let Paul take the lead in the early goings until he burned out. Essentially, he figured out how to do all these things. I think Harry's a smart guy, and I'm very happy with the way this season went. If anything, the only thing that I do wish, and this is never going to change because it's British TV, I just wish it wasn't, 3 episodes a week, boom, boom, boom. Give it more time to sink in a little bit and think about it rather than just, hitting us with it so quickly.
Yeah, although at least it's better than the entire series at once.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I do wonder if next year they'll change the broadcast structure. They probably won't, although
I,
I wouldn't be surprised if next year, or I say next year, I actually
mhm.
think series three will probably air this year. Again, I mentioned this on a previous episode, and it's pretty much been confirmed now. They will film again probably May this year, so they'll
Oh,
they'll film a little bit earlier than they did for the current season.
hmm.
So I reckon they will broadcast. They'll go back to sort of November, December. So we'll get series three a little bit sooner. That's my guess. And I wouldn't be surprised if because of these massive viewing figures, relatively massive for a show like
Hmm.
this, they maybe change it to like Friday, Saturday, Sunday nights. I don't know, but that's really wouldn't surprise me if they made it sort of big weekend prime time viewing.
Hmm.
So who knows? We'll see. Uh I think then we again a few final things to talk about to wrap up, but we are probably ready to conclude our game that we've been playing. We've been playing the Trader Traitor. Da- David, did you lie to me?
I did.
I lied to you too. I'm laughing because I think I've done a not great job this week. I don't know. I think you're gonna get me, and I think I'm not gonna get you.
You have more confidence in me than I have confidence in me. So, but okay.
All right, I'm gonna guess your lie first.
Okay.
I'm gonna throw myself in. I've got a few options. You, because I didn't watch Uncloaked, and you know that I didn't watch Uncloaked, so you could well have lied about anything in that, and I would not know. So I do wonder if the full audience that you said there was a whole audience there. I wonder maybe that wasn't true. I really don't know. But then maybe I could have. I don't know. Maybe that would be quite risky because I might have seen a little clip of it on social media or something. You at one point much earlier you said, "Oh, I've just had a comment pop up on YouTube. Someone's left it," and I thought maybe that was improvised or pretend improvised. I'm gonna go for something really early on. You had already told me that you'd kind of had the outcome of the episode spoiled. Someone had left a comment on one of your videos, and then you said that they followed it up with an apology comment, and you didn't tell me that earlier. So I'm wondering if that's the lie.
Damn it.
Yeah, is that the lie?
It is. And so the thing is, last night I was like, oh, I can set it up perfectly. I can message him and say, hey, someone just responded and commented that they apologized. And then as I was going to bed, so it's like midnight my time. So it's like 6 in the morning your time. And I know you're fast asleep. And I'm like, yeah, but if I tell him that now, so I've already sent this message a couple hours earlier, but still you were already asleep. And I'm like, then technically I've told him this lie before the game even began. And so I don't feel right doing that. So I unsent the message before you read it.
This makes sense because there's a little thing saying delete. David deleted this message, and I thought,
Oh,
I wonder what he was going to say.
I didn't know you would see that, but yes. So I unsent it and I was like, ugh. So I tried at least to say it, it came in just this morning, right before we talked, but I didn't want to make it obvious that I was trying to make it like, oh, it came just this morning right before we talked. So then I was hoping that you would also think that the YouTube thing that really did pop up. And then I saw you like move to write something down and I'm like, oh, good, maybe that'll get him. And so, but no, you, I worried that you would know that because we had talked about everything else. But I was like, well, if I just say when I woke up this morning, maybe he won't realize, or he won't think that I would have told him that. But
I've finished the season victorious. Woohoo! Funnily
damn it.
enough, I also got a YouTube notification whilst we were recording
Mm.
of somebody asking of the podcast, uh, are you going to do a final episode podcast? I thought, yeah, I'm literally doing it right now. Um,
Nah, we decided not to.
yeah. We did the first 11. That was
Yeah.
enough. David, do you have a guess of what I might have lied to you about?
So I have three possibilities. One, when you were talking about people booing Harry, and I was like, yeah. But then, I know people at these things, and I could absolutely see them booing Harry. So yeah, I'm going to buy that one. The next, I can't read. Oh, Raven. Something about the show Raven. I mean, you could tell me any story you wanted about that, and you would know that I have no way of knowing whether or not that was true. And then the last one, you were talking about the music from the soundtrack of Interstellar. Now, I've never seen Interstellar. I have zero idea if that was the music from Interstellar. That one sounds just not correct. It's going to come down to Raven or Interstellar. I'm going to go with Interstellar, but I won't be surprised if it's Raven.
They could It could be neither. It could be something
Well,
else
that's true.
entirely.
That's true.
The music they played at the end, I am 99% certain, was the Hans Zimmer Interstellar score. So
Damn it.
that was true.
Okay.
I listen to that music a lot when I'm writing, and I recognized it straight away. The story about Raven, there was a kids show called Raven. The guy who hosted it wore this feathery outfit, and people have been making fun of it and saying it looks like Claudia's. I did lie that the final episode Raven always ended with a ship
Yeah.
and sails.
I should have gone with Raven. Damn it.
You
I
were
knew that because that there's no way I know that. So,
yeah, so close. I did wonder if maybe your social media might have showed you these funny comparisons that I was, and you still wouldn't have known what Raven was, but
right.
you might have spotted it
Right.
online. So yeah, I I took advantage of your not being a child in Britain. So, but a few things before we sign off. The mini competition winner. So the BBC have their Traitors prediction game online, and we had a mini competition for listeners of the podcast. In the end, I have ended up in joint second place, which I'm quite
Mm.
happy about. I have 2,476 points. David, have you checked out your ranking?
No, because it locks up. I mean, there's something wrong with the website where every time I click on go to the rankings of your group,
Mm,
it locks up and it like
uh,
the whole thing, at least on my phone, it just locks up and I can't do anything with it. And then like if I take like 6 tries, it usually eventually makes it through, but I didn't have time to do that this morning.
sad to tell you, you have not won. You have slipped to 12th place with
12th
with
place.
yeah, with 1,976 points. I don't know why the points now have like sixes and nines at the end of them. Before they were pretty round numbers.
Well, because I think it was because remember I mentioned there's some penalty you get for
Oh yeah,
changing the people at the end.
this is true.
And it's some percentage, like you lose
Ah,
80% or you lose. So
okay.
I'm sure that's where it comes from. But you could click on the, show where you could. I can't because it'll lock up. But you could click on the part where it, says show where my points came from.
Okay.
And
It'll break it down.
yeah.
Uh, Below me in third place then was Rachel with 2,439 points. Joint second with me is someone called Nine Vic and
Oh
the
yes.
winner. Yes.
We had questions from Nine Vic Man
Oh,
previously.
perfect. The winner then of the mini competition was John B with 2,576 points. John B, send us a message, get in touch, and I will send you a personal congratulations or something like that. I'm not sure yet.
Well, what you don't know is John B is actually Harry's pseudonym. So, he not only wanted to win the game, but he wanted to win this game as well.
Yeah, he knew everything.
Yes.
A wee reminder that David and I are, well, mostly David and I, sometimes not me, are covering Traitors US. The episode 5 recap episode is out now, which I am not on, with a last minute change of guest hosts. I've been teasing that a faithful guest would be joining, and that didn't turn out to be that way. Never mind. Good job I didn't name them. Instead, you have another fantastic guest. So that episode is out now, and we will be covering the Traitors US episode 6 uh, soon, next weekend, right?
Soon. We have to figure out the days now that there's no Traders UK anymore.
Yeah, but my life will be far easier now. I also just want to remind people that the Traitors, well, people in the UK, you will be able to watch Traitors Australia Series 2 right now. The whole series is on BBC iPlayer. And what's more, I have already covered that whole season on the Tradar podcast. So you could watch and you can listen along. All the episodes are there, including, you may just have to be a wee bit careful with looking at episode titles because I've interviews with a few cast members, including a couple of the finalists. Yeah, be careful. There's a playlist on YouTube as well, so I guess you can sort of naturally let it cycle
Mhm.
through. I don't think it'll spoil too much. And later in the year, Traitors US season 2 will also be on BBC for UK viewers, as well as the Traitors New Zealand.
Mhm.
A couple of final things. I've had another nice donation on coffee.com from someone called, I think, IMO, unless it's an L and it says Elmo, or it's a one and it's one mo. I don't know. I think it's IMO. So whoever IMO is, maybe it just means in my opinion. This lovely person sent a donation to help me with the podcast. So thanks very much. If anyone else has been enjoying this whole season and feels like they want to chip in a little bit, just to help me with the running costs, you could do so by visiting ko-fi.com/Matthew Keeley. You don't have to do that. Some people have sent me messages saying, "Oh, I can't donate, but I really like the podcast." That's fine as well. If you are listening or streaming, that's fantastic support too. And if you're leaving a little review or a comment, 5 stars, obviously, then that is very much appreciated. lots of comments on YouTube recently on the videos, so there's lots of nice discussion going on there. So that's I always reply when I can to those, and David, you quite often reply to them as well.
Mhm.
So if you leave a comment on YouTube, we will see them and we'll get involved if you've got any questions. Finally, then, David, where can we find you?
So I am all over social media. So that's another thing. People can follow me in all these different places and retweet and repost and follow you as well, obviously. You can find everything at my link tree, which is linktree/David Bloomberg with a dot before the EE in the URL for Linktree. Or you could find me on most text-based social media like Twitter and Blue Sky as at David Bloomberg. And on the video platforms, TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram is at David Bloomberg TV, and Threads is at David Bloomberg TV also because it's still connected to Instagram. Um, I've been trying to, I mentioned this at the end of the US one. I've been trying to get some traders discussion going at Blue Sky and Threads, and I'll get a couple of people responding, but it's just not much. Threads at least sort of has a little bit of a hashtag system that they're trying to do, but they're doing it so poorly that it doesn't really work well. And Blue Sky has nothing. So literally, you just have to follow people and hope that they're talking about what you want them to talk about. Um, but going back to the videos, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, I have been posting at least 2 reality TV short videos every day on each of those sites. Of course, lately they've been mostly from the Traitors UK. And I mean, when you have 3 episodes a week, there's material to, put out there. There's also from the Traitors US, some Survivor flashback videos from older seasons. And in just a couple days, Australian Survivor will start back up, and I will have my mini Y blank lost videos and other videos from that show. And I know that you are just dying to jump in and watch Australian Survivor, right?
I'm right after we finish recording. That is what I'm going to do.
Yeah. And they also have like 3 episodes a week, and it's a lot.
A lot.
It's a lot with
Yeah.
Australian Survivor.
Yeah. Fantastic. And you can keep up with the Trader podcast online on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at the Trader Podcast, or on X at the Trader Pod. And you can email me with questions, nice comments. You just want to have a chat. Send me a picture of you in your Claudia wig and Traitor's cloak at the Trader Podcast at gmail.com. David, what a series it's been. Thank you for coming on to most of the episodes and helping me out with it. It's been great. Great finale discussion. And of course, we again will be back very soon to talk about Traitors US episode 6.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. And it's been fun as always.
Brilliant. I am going to finish with my closing phrase, and I know that you will follow it up with yours. So until next time, listeners, keep us on your radar.
Stay traitorous.